Greetings and welcome back to the channel. Hope you are doing well. This is going to be my guide to Asami1. This is very much designed to be a follow-up to the guide that I did a couple of days ago on Asami2. The reason I mention that is because I ended up spending a lot of time on that one, and a lot of the stuff which was covered there will be referred to here. So when I talk about the hazardous package, I went into it in some detail in that guide in terms of Amanozako having an aura and then Suzaku being able to move people around within it and Raijin potentially adding to it and so on and so forth. So there will be a lot of references to that guide. So even if your sole interest is Asami1, I think that my Asami2 guide covered a great deal of the new Oni rework in general, along with some of the versatile and out of keyword options that work well. And so it would be probably very beneficial to go and watch that before watching this. So if you haven't, feel free to, pause, go and start with that one and then come back. Or not. Be a rebel, do what you want. So, Asami1 was, prior to the rework, the only Asami. So she was the powerhouse, she was the well-known Jorogumos summoning maniac, who was difficult to beat on a good day. Never mind a bad one. With the rework, Asami2 has gained a lot of the attention, because her crew upgrade is arguably better. So the crew upgrade for Asami2 is the one that allows us to teleport using rift markers, whereas the crew upgrade for Asami1 allows her models, and let's maybe bring this up. So here we are. Hunt through time and space. So once again, it allows us to ignore rift markers. Again, this is restricted to Oni, and that will be a little bit more relevant in Asami1 than in Asami2, which I'll come on to. But essentially, the reason that that's more significant is because Asami2 is more tempted to stay strictly in keyword, with maybe one out of keyword pick. Asami1 is much less tempted to do that for reasons we'll come on to, but it's important because the models which are not Oni are not unaffected by rift markers, and so these rift markers that both Asamis can now produce, which are hazardous 30mm, damage 1, destructible, they will damage your own models. So be very careful with your positioning of both your models and your rift markers. You will have fewer rift markers with Asami1, and you do have pretty decent control of where they are, but nonetheless, do be careful. So then we have Violation of Reality. This is the Asami1 specific part, which is the once per activation. Important to remember that. This model may draw line of sight and range for its melee actions from friendly rift markers within 8. So there's a couple of things there. One is that this does not say this model during its own action or anything like that. It says range for its melee actions. Those melee actions could be generated by coordinated attack, for example. So if a model smacks another model, generates coordinated attack, then I will just check the wording on coordinated attack to be 100% sure I'm not spouting nonsense. But if we go to Kenshiro, another friendly model may take a melee action targeting the same model. Nothing stops you then using a model that is quite a way away, but within 8 inches and line of sight of a rift marker, and it's an Oni model. So it's Oni models only may, once per activation, draw line of sight and range for a melee action from friendly rifts within 8. So coordinated attack becomes quite spicy in Asami1 because you're really not limited so much by positioning. And so Asami1 herself has coordinated attack on a trigger. We'll get onto it. But if you remember from the Asami2 guide, there's Kenshiro there as a possibility. And I think he becomes a little bit more tempting here because of the potential for that trigger. not in the sense that he becomes an auto-include or anything like that, but he certainly becomes very interesting, right? Because this ability to attack through rifts is pretty new and requires a little bit of thought. So how do we use this, and when is it good? Well, one of the things that's worth thinking about, maybe I can bring up Vassal. Right, so if we've got, let's get some rift markers and just chuck them around. So rifts have happened, cool. And then we've got an opposing model. Let's imagine we've got a Shenlong on the other side, and he's got some Fuhatsu action going on over here. Within one of a rift, cool. And we have our Fuhatsu's not a great example, but nonetheless, let's just crack on with it. So no, actually, let's not, because it makes a better point. Let's take a different model. So let's imagine we're playing against Lin, and they've got themselves a Raijin. Okay, and we have ourselves a Suzaku. Cool. And this Suzaku, for whatever reason, wants to be over here. Let's imagine that our goal this turn is to vote on a center ballot, right? So we want to vote on a center ballot, but there's nothing around here that we can attack, so we can't gain any value from that that movement that we're getting there. So normally we would simply have to move, maybe use our Wind's Wrath bonus to get the extra 1 inch, and then we take the second AP interact. And we get to vote on our ballot, that's great. But now imagine that instead of doing that, we're allowed to simply charge to here. Now we are within 8 of this rift, and thus we can, during that charge in this direction, so we're going over here, and yet we're allowed to charge and smack this lad over here. We then flip it, and oh, look at that, we've won. Now this is up we go, right? Suzaku has up we go. So now all of a sudden, this Raijin can be placed over here and takes 2 damage in the process. Now let's imagine that there was a rift marker there as well. So now he's taken 3 damage, and when he activates, he's going to take 1 more, and anyone that tries to go anywhere near him or tries to move him out of activation would cause him to take a damage as well. And also, he's now tucked inside a building behind a wall and not where he wanted to be, and certainly nowhere near the scoring position that might have been over here, for example. And we've done all that while simply moving towards where we wanted to be anyway. And with pretty massive safety upon failure. So even if we'd failed the attack, and let's imagine that instead of having a 2-inch reach, we're attacking with something that has a 1-inch reach, and normally we would think, oh god, if we fail the attack, then we're going to be engaged and we can't do what we want to do. No, we're not going to be engaged, because we're going to be 8 inches away. In fact, we're going to be more like 10 inches away, because 8 plus the rift plus the melee reach to the model. So we can attack things from an incredibly safe distance away from them. That opens up a few different dynamics to the crew. One is that trading very often suddenly becomes not trading, because they lose a model, you don't. You're able to bring a model within range of a rift marker once it's activated. Obviously, you don't let them just walk away, but once they've activated something and they're within some kind of range, we have a number of ways to move models in the Oni crew. So we have Betari with her lore, we have Lady Yume with her hole in the world, we have Asami1 with her demonic tresses, which we'll come on to in a moment, and we have Suzaku with all of his up we go shenanigans plus Wind's Wrath, etc. And then we've got Kamaitachi with some towards away shockwave nonsense. So we really do have an incredible amount of ways to move people. So once they've activated, or are in a bad position, or we can put pressure on, we can move them into a spot where they're near a rift marker and within about 10 inches of our crew. And that's a hell of a long way, right? So if you think about their front model, and then you think about a 10-inch gap and then your crew, and then you think, well, their front model isn't going to be in a straight line with their crew, so their crew is going to be a little bit further behind than that even. So their ability to trade back is going to be really limited. They're going to be getting sort of 1 attack per model instead of 2, and in between those attacks we're going to have chance to heal up or move away or begin to trade even more aggressively. And again, I'm using trade in the rough sense because we might not be losing models to do it. So there's that element of trade core mechanics become a bit skewed with this ability to be, while moving to wherever we want to be, we can be really efficient with our movement because we can move to wherever we want to be and attack while on the move. Now, because it's once per activation, we're going to be wanting to make a lot of focused attacks because you only get to make one via the Rift, and of course most models can only charge once, so you really want to make it count. And so very often we're going to want to have focus, and that makes a Kunoichi a reasonable thought into an Asami1 list. Now, I'm not going to recommend hiring one, but I would totally understand why you would, and you'll sort of see what I mean as to why they can be good. So yeah, when you're making these pretty regular one attack per models through a Rift from a safer distance, you want them to be big, heavy hitting, focused attacks. And preferably with some kind of displacement or something like that. So Suzaku's a great opportunity to move people about, and you can do stuff like Betari can smack someone through a Rift and then declare the here or there trigger, is it? Or your I think it's one of the ones where I think it's the same one as Valedictorian has, so you push them 4 inches, then push yourself and make another attack. So you could, with Batari, charge someone, smack them from 8 inches away, push them 4 inches away from wherever they were, and then push yourself 4 inches from where you were, and then smack another model that was nowhere near the fight. So you can sort of hear the amount of options that are opened up to you just via this simple crew mechanic. Right, let's move on to... No, let's finish this point and then we'll move on to Asami1's card. The other thing that this allows you to do, it doesn't just change the way that trading works. It also opens up a sort of hit and run style, which is to charge within 8, hit something, hopefully with some kind of displacement or enough damage to just kill the fucking thing, and then be, as I mentioned, sort of on your way somewhere else. This can involve sort of guerrilla tactics. So you can think of it as a sort of hit and run. You just come in, smack someone hard once, and then move out, away to sort of make it harder for them to get you. And while you might not be killing them, you're really chipping them down. And that can be sort of an attrition style. So it's not so much this idea of a quick trade, and then in this case, we're hoping to not trade at all, just get a sort of an unanswered kill. But we can do so much damage so many times with so many single focused attacks, because Asami1 herself can hit for 6, Yume can hit for 6, Amanazako hits for 5, Story of Suzaku can hit for 4, but then that's with a displacement, and there's nearly always a rift marker somewhere, so that's another 1, and so on and so forth. So there's a great deal of possibilities to sort of smack somebody hard for 5 or 6, and then just shuffle away. And in the meantime, it should be pointed out that Asami1 has not lost her ability to summon. In fact, it's got even easier. So this is the card for Asami1 now. She still has protected Oni, so she can discard a card to have an Oni within 2 take the hit for her. She now has extended reach. She is defense 6, willpower 5, so a slightly different defensive profile than people who might be expecting Asami2. I would think that people will, over time, be expecting Asami2 and be aware of Asami1. Because Asami2's leap mechanic is probably the slightly more broken of the 2 crew upgrades, as I mentioned, but they're both still pretty damn good. And in combination with Asami2's very, very easy rift generation and the ability to keep her Oni alive. So the main difference between the two is that Asami1 summons and deals a lot more damage herself, whereas Asami2 allows you to keep all of your Oni, especially your backline, alive more easily and gives you a lot more mobility. So that's the sort of main key differences between the two. Also, Asami1 now has Beyond's Reward. After this model kills an enemy model, it may remove a rift marker within one of the killed model to add a soul stone to this crew's pool. This means that Asami1 can be very, very handy into crews where you know they're going to have some shitters. So where there's going to be some totems, some birds from Colette, some dogs from Nikima, some gremlins from Summer, whatever it is, you know that Asami can murder, remove a rift, and gain a soul stone. Note that that's not once per activation, nor once per turn, nor once per anything. So if you can really get in there and dish out some pain, and as long as that model is near a rift marker when it dies, then you can be farming some soul stones. Be aware also that Asami herself can open the gate. It's her bonus action. She can create a rift within 8, and then, of course, she's then able to attack through that rift as as the rest of the Oni in her crew, and she has a tome trigger which allows her to push that marker up to 4 inches further, so she can create the rift, push it underneath a model, dealing an unresisted 1 damage, and then charge to within 8 of that rift, and then attack them with an attack that does 2, 4, 6, and has access to pull here and there, so push either this model or the target up to 3 inches, and if you do that and push them through the rift that you've just placed them under, then you can deal another damage. So for those not paying attention, if the model is vulnerable to hazardous damage, then, and I'm just going to get rid of this because it's bothering me, there we go, I don't know about you guys, but orange little pop-ups on my window just drive me mad. In terms of damage, she can push a rift under the model, deals 1 damage, then charges through, hits them, and let's imagine stat 6 versus defense with incredibly good cards, because we're going to hire Maddox, as we'll get onto in a moment. We're going to get hit, we're going to hit with a focused attack, and we're going to get through the severe 6. Fantastic. So we've now hit them for 1 and 6. And then if we either stone or have the mask, then we can push through the additional 1 damage. So we've got 6 + 1 + 1, and we're hitting for Seamus levels of damage. And then assuming that we kill them with that, because most people do die to Seamus levels of damage, then they are going to be guaranteed within 1 inch of a rift, and therefore we can remove that rift and gain back the soul stone that we spent for either the pulled here or there, or maybe the summon that we did this turn, whatever it is. So Asami's turn generally nowadays looks like create rift, push it underneath the feet of whatever we intend to kill, charge with a focused hit that we get from a Manjaku, hopefully, or maybe a Kunoichi, or maybe just from the previous turn if we take the concentrate action. And then we charge and we murder the model that we've just pushed a rift under, and then we remove that rift and gain a stone, and then we summon a Jorogumo. In fact, we probably, forgive me, we do summon the Jorogumo first for reasons that we'll come on to. But having this opportunity to open the gate, charge, murder something, gain a stone, summon something, and then usually use demonic tresses somewhere for some effect, is just an unbelievably powerful turn. So Asami1's turn herself, her actual model, her card, is much, much stronger than Asami2. It's much better. Her attack, both of her attacks, and her ability to summon, and her bonus to a certain extent, it's just really, really, really good. But she doesn't have any way to heal herself, unlike Asami2. She doesn't really have a great many ways to stay alive. She has protected Oni and extended reach, but if people can get around those in any way. And also, there's not that many Oni that you really want to take the hit for her. And if they do, yeah, it's not a very defensive crew. It's a very aggressive crew. And you're going to have to accept that unlike in Asami2, where you can engineer situations where you very often don't lose a model. I've had lots of games where I haven't lost a model and I've almost tabled the opponent by turn 3, turn 4. That's not going to happen with Asami. You're going to be trading. You're going to be losing some models. You can obviously make that favorable, and by keeping distance and using rift attacks and by summoning models that we don't care about. So we're going to lose lots of summoned models, hopefully, and we're going to try to trade those effectively and quickly for enemy models, reducing their ability to score and affect their schemes, and then we're going to, with whatever's left on our side of the table, try to score our points. So it's very much a kill then score crew as it was pre-rework, but it can take advantage of exactly the same hazardous potential that Asami2 has, in terms of we still have rifts, we still have Amanazako putting up her hazardous aura, we can still hire the same amount of keyword models if we wish, in terms of Raijin to add potentially more hazardous and more displacement, or Kenshiro for displacement, and we have Story of Suzaku to really displace people massively within those hazardous bubbles that we've created. And in addition to that, we've now got Asami herself, who can 6 against movement, so very often with a stat advantage, push a model up to 6 inches, and then has some seriously good triggers on that, namely Cocooned in Hair, target suffers 2 damage and stun. That's incredible, because now we push them 6, maybe into 2 versions of hazardous, so they take 4 damage and stun, and we do that with a stat advantage on a non-pistol attack, so we can do it while engaged. Or we can move someone 6 and then create a rift marker into base contact with them. That doesn't deal an immediate damage in terms of the rift, because it's create, and because it happens after the movement has ended, but it then opens up that model, whichever one we've kidnapped with the demonic tresses, because now there is a rift marker within one of it, we can now open fire with pretty much everything in our list. Coordinated attack has the unbelievable advantage of the crew upgrade that I explained earlier. So that coordinated attack doesn't say that anything has to be in melee with the target, it just has to be able to take a melee action. And since it can do that with a crew upgrade, it can do that from a seriously long distance away. Alright, so that is all of the... I was going to say more basic parts of the card. No, I'd say the next part is even maybe more basic, but is the summoning. So Asami maintained her summoning ability, and it is now simply the cost of the Oni minion models that you wish to summon plus 3 masks. So you are still going to need masks, and so you're going to have to hope to draw them, or you're going to have to take some serious card fixing to make sure that you draw them, or you're going to have to stone for the masks. And you are going to need to be summoning pretty much every turn for Asami to reach the potential that you want it to be at. The good news is that she can farm stones, as we talked about earlier, so she tends to get those stones back that she uses for summoning. The price as per pre-rework is essentially -1. So if you remember any of the prices from before, you knock 1 off and that is the new price. So for example, a Jorogumos, which was previously a 13 of masks, is now a 12 of masks. This is incredibly useful because it means that you can sort of more easily guarantee these 13s that you need to get through these really like Seamus level damage attacks, and then still only have a 12 hanging back to summon that Joro, whereas previously you'd have to sort of decide, am I getting this attack through or am I summoning this Joro? Now you can very, very often do both, especially if you have some kind of card fixing. The reason for this, or I mean, I say reason as if it's justified, it's not justified. The reason is that they lost flicker. So these things that you're summoning used to be able to get a positive to both attack and damage, and now they cannot. And so their sort of proposed balancing factor for this was to provide both the rift mechanics and the crew upgrades, but then also they've decided to give you a discount on the summoning. And I think that's just a really big mistake and oversight, and we already traded the flicker mechanic for the rift and crew upgrade mechanics. You don't need to then give us a discount as well, but they did, and so that's why Asami1 maintains a serious level of strength, even though Asami2 is one of the more busted things in the game. So how does this now work in terms of, if there is no flicker, then how do they balance the summons? So Asami1 summons still come in with no slow, they still get a full activation, they are not mindless, and they are not insignificant, though of course like every summon they are effectively insignificant on the turn that they are summoned, and after that they still may not interact with strategy, but they can still help you a lot with some schemes, like hold up their forces, or they can steal some intel stuff that's not a strategy marker, they can steal it from a model, and so on and so forth. So there are things that they can do, but mostly what Asami's summons do are murder. So you summon Jorogumos and you murder. Now in the pre-rework, the summoned models would come in with flicker, and Asami had ways to reduce that flicker, sometimes by taking damage, sometimes by getting triggers and so on. And then if they had a certain amount of flicker at the end of their activation, they went poof and died. Now, the flicker is sort of generated and calculated when they are summoned. So when you summon something, it will come in. Let's imagine that you summon a Jorogumos. Let's bring up Asami here. And let's get rid of this example for now. So we have Asami, and we have what is now an 8-inch summoning range. So it used to be 6, it's now 8. Again, you'll see why, and then you'll question whether that's actually a good idea or not, and probably come up with the answer that no, it's not okay. So the reason is that she can now summon within 8 inches. If she summons a Jorogumos, which is a cost of 9, and she summons it here, and there are no enemy models anywhere nearby, and it's a 9 cost summon, it will come in with 0 flicker. So it will have no flicker at all, and at the end of its turn, it will check to see, at the end of the turn, so not at the end of its activation, but at the end of the turn, you will check to see if it has any flicker. If it has flicker, you'll reduce that flicker by 1. If it doesn't have any flicker, it will die. So, if you summon a Joro turn 1, and then you have no enemy models nearby, and you don't manage to give it any other flicker, and then it will do whatever it wants to do, and then at the end of the turn, it will check for flicker, realize it has none, and die. Now, it still has the demise of all the other Oni, so it would still create a rift, happy days, but not the best value. If you summon an Oni with 6 cost or less, then it will come in with 1 flicker. So it comes in automatically with 1 flicker, which means it will then be able to take its full turn and do whatever it wants to do. And then at the end of the turn, it will check for flicker, notice that it has 1, reduce it by 1, and then we move on to the next turn. During the next turn, if it doesn't manage to gain any flicker anyhow, it will do its full activation. It will stay there until the end of the turn, and then at the end of the turn, it will check for flicker, realize it has none, die, and drop another rift. Hooray. How then can we get more flicker or deal with it once we are running out? Well, there are 2 ways. First of all, so if we imagine that we're up against our monk opponent and he has himself a charm warder and a low river monk here, if we summon within 3 inches of an enemy model, we gain 1 flicker. We can do that up to a maximum of 2. So the ideal summoning position in general will be to summon a Jorogumo usually within 2 inches, because that's its engagement range, but 3 is enough. So within 3 will get us the flicker. We can have a maximum of 2. So we've got the 2 models there, fantastic. It doesn't matter that we're a 9 cost model, so we don't get our free 1, but we do get 2 for being near enemy models. And then again, that will at the end of the turn go down to 1. And then at the end of the next turn, it'll go down to 0, and at the end of the next turn, the Joro will die. So you get, if you summon within 3 inches of 2 enemy models, the model that you summon will get a full 3 turns of value, which is more than enough and incredibly good. If we summon 1 cost of 6 or less, so that's your Yokai, your Tengu, your Akaneme, or your Katashiro, then you only need to be near 1 enemy model to get the full duration, because you'll have 1 for being 6 cost or less, 1 for being near within 3 of an enemy model. And then the same would apply. The only way that this can be affected in any other way is Amanjaku. So Amanjaku has a bonus action which on a 5+ will allow you to give a flicker to a model within 6. And this is important because it allows us on, for example, corner deployment. So we've got ourselves our corner deployment over here, and our enemy is all the way over here, and it's going to take us a while to get to them. So we're not going to really probably be, unless they rush forwards, we're unlikely to get Asami comfortably within 8 inches and then summoning, and then 3 inches. That is a long way, by the way. So 8 plus a Jorogumo plus 3 is, I can't be asked doing math, so I'm just going to measure it lazily. It's in the region of 13 inches. So yeah, but even so, on corner, you might not be able to get there. So what you can do now is you can still summon that Joro, because Joros in general, I mean, you only need a 12 to summon them. They're unbelievably beastly good models, and they're the most value you can summon, so why not? You summon that Joro, and then Amanjaku goes, wanders up to within 6, and then as long as he doesn't black the flip, hooray! Now the Joro has a flicker, which means end of turn, it will check for flicker and drop 1. In other words, Amanjaku can keep 1 summon alive for the entire game, so long as both Amanjaku and the summon are alive, and he doesn't black or fail the bonus action. So you can have sort of 1 summon maintained. So in the early game on, for example, corner, you can move up a bit, summon a Joro, keep it alive with Amanjaku, and then charge it in the next turn and either just sacrifice it or try to follow up with Amanjaku and then keep it alive 1 turn longer, etc., etc. But at that point, you start to snowball very often, because you've sent in 1 summon Joro, and while they're dealing with that, you walk in and summon another one, and then these Joros that you've summoned start to kill something, and then they are becoming less and less capable of dealing with the Joros that you've already got, and then you summon more Joros, and then Amanjaku gets involved with a hazardous aura, and you can already see how this gets a bit silly. So that hopefully covers the crew upgrade, the summoning process and how Flicker now works, and Asami1's card herself. Okay, I'll just quickly check my notes. Talked about the stone farming. Yeah. Okay. So when and why would we hire Asami1 over Asami2 or vice versa? And I think that's a really useful thing to have a think about. And it's also why the crew building differs a little bit, I think. So why would you want to hire Asami1? Well, if you are pretty confident that your opponent is ready for the hazardous plan of Asami2, and that's what Asami2 does best. She does a loose bubble with severely hazardous dependent damage output. So it's very hard to kill and it's very hard to survive if you can't get around hazardous. If you can, then you're much less vulnerable to her looking at you, repeating an action and dropping a rift in your face. And the mobility there is another thing. So it depends as well on the pool. So if mobility is a really important thing, then you're more likely to lean into Asami2. But if they are able to ignore the hazardous element of Asami2, and if they're able to ignore maybe the displacement element, because those are kind of combined, right? If they're immune to either one of those things, then the whole hazardous plan starts to fall apart a little bit. But also, if they're bringing things like armor with some ability to ignore hazardous, or incorporeal, which is a very good answer to Asami2's gig. Or, and this is important, if they bring kidnap. So Asami2 very largely relies on having your crew within 8 inches of Asami2 and then her soaking a lot of the damage for your other Oni and then having that healed back up. There are two main answers to that. One is to kidnap the model that you wish to kill outside of the 8-inch bubble, a bit like you might do against Yedza, or to kidnap Asami2 herself, again, a bit like Yedza. So you're sort of thinking of it a tiny bit like a Yedza crew, where you need to have either irreducible or kidnap, or just generally displacement. Like, it doesn't need to be a full-on kidnap. If you can just move them a bit, that's often enough to get them outside of the 8. So crews which you know are likely to have some kidnap mechanics and some displacement mechanics are ones where you might think, right, what I would like to do with Asami2 here, which is sort of rely on hazardous ping damage and displacement and keeping my models safe, isn't going to work here. And so what I want to do is bring Asami1, who doesn't rely on those things anywhere near as much. In fact, almost not at all. The other thing is, as we talked about, if they have a bunch of shitters. So if you know that the crew you're facing tends to bring a bunch of shitters, or they're there automatically via totems, and by shitters I mean low cost, low value, low health, easy to kill models, then it gives something Asami to really easily and cheaply farm for stones, which is really nice. In addition, I'm going to recommend quite often hiring Minako Rhea with Asami1, and Minako also benefits from having things which are slightly easy to kill because she can smack them, she can now force them to attack herself, that gives them the upgrade, and then she kills them or you kill them with something else and they become a Wanyudo for you to then use for scoring and or additional murder. So yeah, if the enemy has the ability to ignore your hazardous quite so much, you might think about Asami1. If they have the ability to kidnap, you might think about Asami1. If they are particularly vulnerable to Jorogumos, then you can do one of two things. You can play Asami2 and hire multiple Jorogumo, and that's a perfectly reasonable thing to do, and I would recommend it fairly often. Or you can go with Asami1, because then you know that you're going to have multiple Joros during the game, and they're probably not going to be able to deal with it particularly well. Okay. Let's move on to what I would consider the core list of Asami1 and why. So this is the list which I would recommend running the vast majority of the time. So you've got Asami and Amanjaku, and then you're hiring Amanazako still because brutally good. The hazardous aura, when it works, is just so insanely good, and Dark Bargain is a very useful tool, especially in this crew, which is slightly lacking in scoring potential sometimes, especially since she can't protect her backline quite so well. So things like the Kamaitachi scoring late, which can happen very often in Asami2 because it doesn't die, won't happen here because people will try to kill the little bastard, and they'll be much more likely to succeed. Gwyneth Maddox. So when you have a summoner, you really do want to make sure that you've got the cards to summon. Additionally, you've got a lot of ability to do severe 6 in this crew, or at least severe 5. and so you're going to need Severes not only to hit and make sure that that attack goes through, but then also to make sure that when you get your straight flip, you are able to cheat the Severe to get the 6 through. Otherwise, it wasn't really worth doing in the first place. So you're going to need multiple Severes, and one of the best ways to get multiple Severes in 10 Thunders is to hire Maddox. So she's there pretty much solely for card draw. She is, of course, a significant body, and you can move her up a little bit with the Kamaitachi and stuff like that to make sure that later in the game she can do some walk interact stuff or some charge your own model, draw a bunch of cards, and then interact. But her main job is just make sure that you are constantly topped up on the cards that you need to do the summoning that you want with both Asami and with Minako if you run her, but also to try and get you the suits that you want, which will save you stones on suits for masks for summoning, for example, or on tomes for summoning with Minako Rhea. And of course, if you've got a lot of high cards, you basically get to choose where you put those resources. You might choose to use them to kill opponents, you might use them to choose to save your own models, but whichever way you go, having a really good quality hand is really handy. If only that was intentional. Right, Minako Rhea. So why do I think she's good? Well, because if you are playing a summoning attrition game of non-trading, but it sort of looked like trading, then having multiple summons, as we saw in the previous versions, pre-rework, Asami very often ran Minako as well. So you want to be summoning these Katashiro. Now, they are different. Yes, they are weaker. Probably. But they've now got access to the crew upgrades, so this means that Katashiro, as well as everybody else that are summoned by Minako Rhea, or by Asami, you can summon Katashiro with Asami, you probably don't want to, can charge and attack through rifts. Now, you might be thinking, okay, but they've lost the flicker, so their attack is less important. Well, that's true in one sense, but their attack was changed, so it's no longer 1, 2, 4 with a bunch of triggers to gain flicker and do it again, blah, blah, blah. It's now paper cuts, the same attack that you'll find on a bookkeeper. So it's 1, 2, 2, I think. Is it 1, 2, 2? 1, 2, 2. 1, 2, 2, but the enemy must remove an enemy scheme marker within 1 inch of it, and if it cannot, it suffers +1 damage. So either the Katashiro is hitting for 2, 3, 3, or more importantly, you can use it to smack models near scheme markers, and you are on stat 5, but you really don't care very often, and maybe they really care about the scheme, so you might get some good cards out of the opponent, or you might decide it's worth one of your, carefully curated Maddox cards to make this attack go through and remove that scheme and deny them a point. So summoning Katashiro is now really, really handy for the ability to deny. So, and also they can just do a little cheeky bit of damage. 2, 3, 3 is not a bad stat line if they don't have scheme markers near them. You can just keep smacking them. They've got Blade Rush that can make someone take 1 damage if you charge through them. So you charge through them. Also, when they're summoned, they've still got Made to Kill. So when they're placed, they will get to make a melee attack for free. And now their demise is that they create a destructible hazardous rift marker, as most of the Oni do, but also now, because they're now 3 cost and 3 health, they are essentially relegated right down to shitters. They have the demise torn up. It's the same thing as Summer's Gremlins, basically. So if this model has not activated this turn, the opposing player has to discard a pass token. So in other words, you're not risking activation control anywhere near as badly as you were previously by summoning Katashiro. And you are massively increasing your ability to deny the enemy schemes. So I think that having Minako is really solid. Also, as mentioned in the Asami1 guide, Minako Rhea's Instigate trigger on the tome, on the melee, does force the opponent to take an attack against her. That means that you can effectively make it significantly more likely that you're able to summon a Wanyudo after killing. I've done this the majority of games that I've hired Minako Rhea now. I usually get a Wanyudo per game. I've sometimes had 2. You do need to the first Wanyudo to die to be able to do that, but just to be clear. And the reason that this matters, so obviously, yes, summoning Wanyudo is good. Yes, making people attack Minako Rhea and therefore having the karmic upgrade on them is good. But it's also forcing them to take an action, and while that action is perhaps stood in Amanazako and a Rift Marker's hazardous auras, you are looking at an additional 2 damage on top of the attack. So, the synergies that you can find between Minako and and Asami1 are pretty high. I mean, Asami2 as well, but Asami2 really benefits from being an Oni because this sort of teleporting through rift markers is pretty central to what she wants to do, whereas in Asami1 it's a nice benefit but not necessary, and Minako Rhea is really handy in both of them because of laugh off, so normally hiring out of keyword models into an Asami list runs the risk of being dumped into your own rift markers, but if you've got laugh off then that's much less of a problem since they won't be able to do that very much. Cool. So that's Ama, Gwyneth, and Minako. Suzaku. Suzaku is still a real menace, so does an unbelievable amount of damage, a serious amount of output, and being able to do up we go from a very significant distance away, so 8 inches plus rift plus 2 inches, and then place them 3 inches away, within 3 inches of themselves from there. So you can really affect people's movement from a really long way away. That can be immensely good on things like Raid the Vaults. All of that is really handy, but Suzaku is still an enforcer, and damage reduction is now limited. So if you have Asami 2 and you have Suzaku near Asami 2, it's basically immortal because it's effectively armor 4 down to 0, which is ludicrous. Whereas with Asami 1, it is only going to be the regular sort of burning armor that she can use, and defense willpower 5, enforcer, can't use stones, doesn't have anything else, has well versed, has all the story stuff, but also wants to be like in the thick of it, doing up we go stuff. The in the thick of it part is the only reason why that I still recommend hiring in Asami 1, is that you don't have to be in the thick of it anymore because you can attack through rifts. So you can generally stay 8 inches away from your target, either with the conflagration gun or with the up we go through the rift markers. It makes the Wind's Wrath a little bit less effective because you're unlikely to be within 3 of a model, but you can still do the thing where you remove a condition and then gain some burning. So condition removal, nice to have, really nice to have. And you'll note that the weird group really fucked up and still have discard a flicker from the token from the target as part of the bonus. They were told multiple times that this now has no effect other than to kill your own summons and is stupid and should be rewritten, but they didn't want to do it because they've got some hard on about not changing physical cards and it ruins the game, so they really should stop fucking around with that. Anyway, Suzaku is his or her, I don't know, her output is unbelievably good and probably very much still worth taking in Asami 1. Then we've got the usual backline combo in Asami 1 of Kamaitachi. So the Kamaitachi still does an unbelievable amount of really good stuff. So unpack in turn 1, I have the Hurricane throughout the game. Healing, which given that Asami 1 can't heal herself and Asami 2 can, suddenly having Kamaitachi behind Asami 1 can be really nice. Just generally, like, Kamaitachi becomes your only real source of healing, so that's pretty good. And of course, having card manipulation with Wonder Weasel is very handy for a summoner, so if you're really struggling to find those cards for the summons, Kamaitachi can help. But Asami 1 cannot keep the Kamaitachi alive anywhere near as well as Asami 2. So you have to be much more careful with your positioning, much more defensive, I would say, and accept that most of the time the best you're going to manage is a walk heal rather than being close enough to do a double heal, because if you get that close, you're probably dead. You know, he's 5'4" with 5 wounds, no defensive tech at all. You need to be careful with this lad in Asami 1, and therefore one of the things that we do is have a Terracotta Warrior. So Terracotta Warrior is there for a couple of reasons. One, because our backline of Amanjaku and Kamaitachi, who are both incredibly valuable but also pretty vulnerable without Asami 2, can be helped a little bit by having Terracotta nearby. Obviously it still suffers from blasts and so on, but you know, it's good that the crew has some weakness, at least, I suppose. So Terracotta's there for that purpose, also to draw you another card, so as many cards as you can possibly get, because the output that you can do with your Jorogumos in terms of damage, Asami in terms of damage, Asami in terms of summoning, Minako in terms of summoning, and Minako in terms of summoning via murder, and then Suzaku's display. Like, you've got so many avenues to use resources to generate value that you need as many resources as you can possibly get your hands on. So Maddox and Kamaitachi and Terracotta is absolutely not overkill. You can definitely use all of those resources and more. Additionally, the Terracotta Warrior still has the Mold of the Other. Name a friendly minion or enforcer that was killed this game, and then you can spend a high mask to replace with that model. Why does this matter? Well, because you are very likely to be summoning Joros in the face of the opponent and purposefully trying to aggressively trade with them pretty hard. So you're going to try not trade with your own models, use guerrilla hit and run stuff with your own models, but with your summoned models, you're going to be trading hard. And as a result, a Jorogumo is very likely to die very early in the game. And maybe Suzaku will die because offensive output very high, defensive output not as great. So one of those two models is likely to die, a summoned Joro or Suzaku. Now, the fact that the Joro was summoned makes no difference at all to Mold of the Other. If the Terracotta replaces with Jorogumo, you're going to need a 13 of masks to do that. And because it's a minion, you can't stone for it, so you're going to actually need the 13 of masks or a red Joker. But if you get those, then you can become a Jorogumo. And because now Jorogumo, when they are hired, get this like pseudo hard to wound, they get this centuries old. The Terracotta was hired, and so replacing into a Joro makes it count as a hired Jorogumo. So in other words, you get yourself a hard to wound Joro in addition to whichever Joro you're summoning that turn. Just for having a Terracotta sitting at the back, drawing you some cards, and maybe dropping you some scheme markers, or voting on some ballots, or whatever else he's doing, or keeping your Kamatachi and Amanjaku alive. So Terracotta, very, 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 very handy for his 4 points. If your bird gets killed early, try to avoid it, but if it does, then you only need a 12 of masks to bring back the bird. So that's also very handy. Also, if they pick off the Kamatachi really early, one of the things you can do is not take the hit, like let the Kamatachi take that hit and die, and then have the Terracotta. If you think they're, for example, going to blast and kill both of them anyway, you can sort of say, yeah, just have it, kill the Kamatachi, and then the following turn, or that turn, you can then use the Terracotta and a not that high mask to become the Kamatachi. So that's another way that the Terracotta can sort of compensate for some of your defensive weaknesses. Okay. Whew. Right, quick check of the notes. Yeah. Okay, so what alternatives to this crew do we have? Well, one alternative is Thangyong. So what you can do is you can drop the Kamaitachi and the Terracotta. I've tested this, and I genuinely prefer the Kamatachi and the Terracotta, but you can do this. You can drop them both to get Thangyong. So the idea is, well, look, we've got Maddox, and we've got enough card draw there to get what we want the vast majority of the time. Kamatachi's a little bit extra. Then we've now got Thangyong, and therefore we've got that Righteous Protector unpack, so we don't need Kamaitachi's Shockwave unpack. So we've sort of taken the two things that Kamaitachi does best, which is the heal and the unpack, the card cycle and the unpack, and we've replaced them with Maddox and Than. And then we're going to say, look, the Kamaitachi wants to do a bit of healing, but he can only heal Oni, and now we've got 3 out of keyword models in this list that the Kamaitachi cannot heal. So it's better defensively to have Thangyong with his massive take the hit aura and his ability to ping heal anyone regardless of keyword, and just sort of accept that and move on with that. So that's one way you can go. I prefer the other one. You've got more scoring pieces, but if they've got a list that can just trivially remove your backline with blasts and pings, and they can trivially remove Terracottas and Kamaitachi, you might decide it's better to just have a straight swap, take them both out, remove that weakness from your backline, and turn it into Thangyong, who is much, much harder to chew through. Other things that you can do. Let's move on to, so this is the basic crew that I recommend. Here's your 8 models that I would play with. Let's get rid of this. And let's get rid of this. Okay, so this is what I would recommend. However, if you're playing against Nephilim, for example, you might decide that Suzaku, with having a melee attack that can't target models with flight, is suddenly a lot worse, because then this crew upgrade is not amazing. So you're left with basically a model with an 8-inch gun, but it's a pretty good 8-inch gun, and having guns against Nephilim isn't a bad thing, so you might still decide to take it, and his bonus can very often disengage him or her to be able to then take that shot. So Suzaku you might still include even in those cases, but if they're like immune to hazardous and you think that you're not going to get much use out of your displacement or whatever, you might choose to drop Suzaku. As we said, you might choose to drop your backline package if you think that if you think that it's too likely to die, and you might replace it with something like Thangyong. Other options in that sort of price bracket in keyword are Betari and Yume. Now, we spoke about these both in Asami 2, and I think that my comments would be similar in terms of their value, but slightly changed in Asami 1. So let's go and have a look at this. So if we go to the Asami 1 core, we edit it and we go to hiring, and we have a look at Yume first of all. So Yume, the big downside of Yume is that her scrying, her card viewing thing, was reduced to once per turn. It was increased to 3 cards instead of 2, but overall it means you're looking at a lot less cards than you were before. So the thing that she did, which was mainly card fixing, was made much worse. And so generally, I still think you probably don't hire Yume. However, if we're looking at really leaning into guerrilla hit and run and sort of non-trade trades, then this ability to use Hole in the World from a rift marker 8 inches away, so we charge to within 8 of a rift, and then we hit someone within 1 of that rift and then place them 6 inches towards us, preferably in a rift, so she can do 2, 3, 6. So then we're using those cards from Maddox to get a high mask, to get a high tome. We use that to smack someone. We hopefully have another severe to hit them for 6. They land in a rift, that's 7, and then we can very trivially finish them off with whatever we've got left. Her ability also with coil around prey, so if they get within, in amongst us, then we've got this 3 versus size, place them in base contact and maybe push them around. So that can be another way to deal hazardous damage if they're not immune to that somehow. And then we've got consume. This model heals an amount equal to the target's health and then kill the target. This could be handy for nomming on Katashiro. So if you've got Minako summoning some Katashiro and then you've got Lady Yume snacking on them to heal herself, and you've got, you're leaning into having more terrifying, for example. So you want to have, like, if you think that they're going to have a low willpower list that isn't ruthless, they're going to struggle with terrifying, you might hire Amanazako and Lady Yume for 2 terrifying 12 models, and then we can also take Betari for another terrifying 11 model, and we can really start to put some pressure on that way. But I still think that, generally speaking, she's an 8-cost enforcer. Terrifying is her only defensive tech, really, and if they want to, they will kill her. So I still don't think she's amazing, but certainly better in Asami 1 than 2, I would say, because you can attack people from much more surprising angles and take more advantage of this hole in the world, kidnap, guerrilla warfare kind of plan. Betari gains a little bit of value on the same basis, that her hunting song, this sort of kidnap lure thing, which then drops a rift, so it's doing both things at once, right? So we lure them in, we drop a rift, that rift then allows anyone, including herself, to be able to charge and attack through that rift safely from 8 inches back. Also, she's got I've got your back, and again, this in Asami 2 is less important because usually you're just going to stand there, soak the damage and heal it back up. You don't need to pull your models back all that often. But in Asami 1, you really want to trade and then not trade, right? So bring them, go in, do the damage, and then when they start to try trading back with you, then you pull your model further back. And now the model that tried to trade with whatever you went in with first is now standing in the middle, hopefully near a rift marker. And again, you can see where we're going with this. Again, she adds to this idea of a terrifying list if you wanted to lean into that, but most importantly, again, as I mentioned in the Asami 2 list, the main thing is ignoring resistance triggers within 6. So if you're up against Raspi 2, Zip 1, Blackbird, or Colette 1, whatever it is that you suspect is coming that's going to hit you with some defensive triggers, maybe Levy, then you can think about Betari. Also, this ability to attack through rift markers gets a bit better with her, because if they're within 1 of a rift marker, you're going to have a natural pause to the duel. You're almost always going to be attacking a model that's within 1 of a rift marker because you're going to be attacking through them, hopefully. Your damage track isn't amazing, but shove aside, allowing you to push them 4 inches away when you're already 9 inches, 10 inches away, is really quite useful, and you need to sort of see that on the table to realize how good that can be. But I would say that stock in Ohagora Betari does go up a little bit in Asami 1 rather than Asami 2. So they are potential replacements for things like Minako Rei. You could definitely not run her if you particularly wanted to. You could not run Suzaku if you really wanted to. And if the enemy is completely immune to hazardous, then you might decide it's not worth, Ma2 or depending on how good May 2 is, or if it's a Hoffman, like an Arcanist Hoffman with a Metallurgist, or Tiri 2, like causing some problems, then you might decide not to run Amanazako. But honestly, I think she's so good that you probably do the majority of the time. So your trade flex slots, if you like, are probably Rhea and Suzaku for your stuff like Yume or Betari. I wouldn't be running Yume, but I'll leave the option open. I have played a lot more Asami 2 games than I've played Asami 1. I've played plenty of Asami 1, but certainly more 2, so I'm not as confident about this being sort of solved. I am pretty damn confident that you pretty much always want Maddox. You almost always want Ama. And then in my opinion, unless you've got a severe reason not to, you want the Kamai and the Terra. So your flex slots are these two. Betari and Yume are possibilities. I will get rid of them now because we've talked about them. Than is another one. I will get rid of it because we've talked about it. Katashiro and Wanyudo, they are basically just byproducts of having Minako in the list. Handy and point scoring and now scheme denial possibility, so that's handy. We've got all of our summoning options. So what are we summoning? As I mentioned, you're almost always summoning a Jorogumo. The Obsidian Bomb no longer exists, so they don't have the demise to blow up and deal damage and burning. They are now simply stun bots and potentially rift creators and healers. So if you really need any of those things, you might summon an Obsidian, but you'd better be damn sure it's a lot better than summoning a Joro, because summoning a Joro is just always really, really good. So, yeah. Yokai, this is more, to be honest, it's just when you didn't have the cards. If you've already spent your cards, or you've had your hand drained, or you just got really unlucky, or Maddox is dead, or whatever, and you can't summon a Joro, you might summon a Yokai because they can do a little bit of work, they'll score some points, they've got Dark Bargain, they're not going to die super easily. Fine. Tengu, you might remember in Asami 2, I consider a Tengu to be pretty much auto-include. In Asami 1, I really don't, because the main thing is that they will just die, and the double leap, which is what makes them so good at scoring in Asami 2, in combination with her keeping them alive, just doesn't happen in Asami 1. So their attack and their being able to attack through rift markers isn't that important. Their mobility and their ability to score and live is what makes them so good in 2. In 1, really not so much. Don't worry about them. Akaname, they're pretty much just marker removal, so if you really, really need marker removal, and if you've not got the cards to summon something good, you could choose to summon a couple of Akaname instead, and I think on a red, can you summon 2 Akaname and a Katashiro? 8, 9, 10, 11... yeah, so on a red Joker you could summon 2 Akaname and a Katashiro, but I mean, I really don't think that's a good spend of a red Joker, but you could theoretically do it. So they're there and that's what they can do. So that's your summons. Right, out of keyword stuff. Charm Orders, they pretty much show up in any Thunder's crew, in any Thunder's list, because if you need to deal with demise or summons, these are your picks. Monk of Low River, they show up here because if you're running an out of keyword list, so if you're running, Maddox and Rhea and something not Suzaku, for example, Fangyong, then the Kamaitachi loses a bit of value because it can't summon, it can't heal non-Oni models, and so you might choose to lean into having either a Low River replace the Kamai, or in addition to. So yeah, Low River sort of stays on the list. More Terracotta Warriors, yeah, I could see that. I could see leaning into that if it was a Seamus matchup or Levy or something where they've got a big nasty attack or displacement that you don't want to eat. You could definitely sneak more Terracotta Warriors into a list, and it would not be a bad thing. Raijin and Kenshiro remain pretty good. And both of them have very, very nice displacement melee attacks, and they really work well with the Rift plus Amanazako hazardous stuff. Kenshiro brings that little bit of card fixing that you don't need as much when you're already paying for Maddox, so there's that. But he is incorporeal, so he ignores your own rifts, which is handy, and brings the coordinated attack trigger, which is so much stronger when you've got the crew upgrade of Asami 1. So I think that's where Kenshiro kind of starts to shine. It's that coordinated attack trigger on a stat 7 attack. However, he's not a henchman, can't stone for it. You're going to have to find the cards. Say hi to Maddox. Raijin still does exactly all the stuff that he did in Asami 2 and does it well. And I think being able to theoretically have a scheme marker become an additional bit of hazardous is neat, but it's more of a gimmick. It's just that he's so good with your existing package, and Maddening Drums is yet another form of kidnap, allowing you to do the non-trade trade style. Yep, so they're both still fine. Right, in Asami 1, you are a little bit lacking that Tengu that we talked about. So the Tengu is your nice little cheap scoring piece that doesn't die early and then gets to do double leaping, double AP, flight 6, stealth kind of stuff, and that scores you a hell of a lot of points. You don't have it in Asami 1. Your backline is much more likely to die. You're much more likely to be lacking significant AP later in the game, and so you might choose that if you want to, depending on the scheme pool and the matchup, that you would rather have one of our sort of alpha schemers, which is Desper and Wukong, and you might choose to put one of those into your list. Desper ignores hazardous while moving, which is kind of nice. Wukong can ignore it while moving with his bonus, so you can kind of get around your own hazardous a little bit, but mostly they're both just very, very, very mobile and very good at getting schemes into place. So yeah, in Asami 1, more so than Asami 2, I would consider them if needed. And again, in Asami 2, you are really tending to try to lean into that hazardous game plan, and also keyword. You're much more incentivized to be keyword locked, because you can hand out fast, you can heal, you can give focused, you can protect them from damage, and you can have them teleporting around. In Asami 1, you're more leaning into the ability to pop out very serious bursts of damage, and so the age-old combinations of either Fuhatsu or Lone Swordsman plus a Kunoichi, or not as you wish, are theoretical additions. I haven't done this very much, but I could absolutely see that if someone's really thinking, oh, it's Asami, right, I'm going to bring my anti-displacement and I'm going to bring my anti-hazardous pieces and, you know, my incorporeal stuff, and then you just rock up with a bunch of severe 6 monsters and a bunch of focus. That's a very different game plan than what they were expecting, and then they've just got a bunch of spider, you know, or they turn up with armor, and it's like, haha, you know, and you can't ping my armor to death, so what are you going to do? Well, I'm going to hit you for 6, and your armor 2 is going to reduce it to 4, and then I'm going to do it again. And then I'm going to prevent you from healing with my summon Joro. So, you know, I think that those little additions are more worth thinking about in Asami 1 than they are in 2. She still can do a lot of the stuff that 2 can do, but I think when you are choosing to lean into 1, it's when you think the hazardous plan is slightly less likely to work, and you want to lean more into the hit them like a truck. That is, I think, everything for Asami 1. If you have any questions, do let me know. And if you disagree with anything that I've said, I'm always really, really fascinated to hear what people think. Or if you've got a little idea for an out of keyword pick that I've maybe overlooked, always interested to try stuff out. I've, as I say, played a ludicrous number of Asami games, but could always try more and could always try more combinations of things. So let me know what you think. And best of luck with your Asami games moving forwards. If I've forgotten anything, as always, I will try to rectify that in the comments after the video is published. Have a wonderful week, and hopefully, as you can see behind me, my here is my PC being repaired. I have got a new power supply for it, and so I thought what I'll do is I'll record this video now before I unplug this computer and then find out that the other one still doesn't work or something like that, but hopefully it's fixed, and if it is, then the recordings of 2 more Asami 2 games will be going up on the channel soon as well, so look forward to those. That's it from me. Have a good day and take care.